All right, welcome back again for another day, another episode of Knowledge Korner. All right, today's insight of the day: Drop Coupes by Nipsey Hussle. This is off of his Crenshaw mixtape that was released October 8th of 2013. This is actually the mixtape that actually got me hip to Nip. I was aware of him before, but when I saw Nip, he looked like Snoop to me. So I just wasn't trying to hear what he had to say. But at that time, I was actually living out west. I was living in Arizona. So I actually got a newfound respect and understanding for West Coast music once I moved out west. So I gave Crenshaw a listen to, and also for people who aren't aware, there was a physical CD copy of this mixtape that was made, and Nip actually sold it for $100, and Jay-Z bought 10 copies of it. So that also piqued my interest that, if Jay's buying, 10 copies of this, I need to listen to it. So I love the mixtape all the way through, but Drop Coupes, for some reason, it resonated with me. I want to say it may be because the beat sounds like a marching band. And, I was in a marching band in high school and everything. So it gives me that feel of being in a marching band. But doing the research for this topic, it's actually kind of prophetic, some of the stuff that he actually says in this song. For people who aren't aware who Nipsey Hussle is, he was a rapper. And he was actually murdered in front of one of his businesses in 2019. I say all of that because in the actual song, he calls himself the 2020 Pac. This song actually came out 7 years before that would have been prophetic. But out of all of the rappers that have come out saying that they're the new Pac, there's never going to be another Tupac. I'm just going to put that out there. But Nip, to me, was the closest to it because of what he did in his community. He bought up a whole strip mall, and every building in that strip mall was a different business that he owned. So one being his clothing brand, the Marathon store. So I'll go in and get into, some of the lyrics, and then I'll go into what I actually found as far as the Bible verse that kind of goes with this. I'm not going to read all of the lyrics. There's some portions of the actual song that resonated with me, so I'm gonna say those and then get into what I want to say. He first starts off saying, "I built my foundation strong, now I can live like a boss." In order for you to live like that boss, as he said, he had to build his foundation strong. How did he do that? By doing the work. In order for you to live like a boss, you have to put in the work in order to do that. And up to that point, Nipsey was doing that. So I definitely agree with him on that. Now, the work for you is definitely going to be different from the work it was for him. He had to put that work in as far as his rap career, releasing mixtapes and everything. The sad part of all of this is pretty much all of Nipsey's music would be considered a mixtape. He actually only released one actual album, and that was Victory Lap, before he was taken from us. I can't see the ceiling. y'all can't see the reason. He's saying that I don't have a ceiling to my potential, but the people can't see that because, as he said, I built my foundation strong. I can't see the ceiling. The ceiling. The limit is the sky for me. I can do whatever I want because I put that work in. They can't stop it. This is my profit. It's my real sweat. Y'all ain't killed ish. But if you a real in, had to do real ish, come from a real struggle, hustle and deal ish, promise you feel this, you know that you're fearless. Ooh. If you come from any type of struggle, and I can kind of correlate this to people who got it out of the mud and built an empire. And then they leave it to their children. Their children aren't necessarily going to have a understanding of what it took to get to that point. They don't understand that struggle. They didn't grow up in that struggle. I myself, I'm not going to sit up here and say that my life was easy. I struggled a lot in my life. I had to hustle. I had to do things that I didn't want to do. My dad would always tell me, you got to crawl before you walk. So there was times in my life that I had to do a job that I didn't want to do. I had to do things that on paper I was overqualified for. But I had to humble myself in order for me to make the money that I need to make in order to take care of my family. That's one thing about me. And I know years ago, one of my older frat brothers told me, he was like, one thing I can say about Tariq, he gonna have a job. And I did. I always had a job. It may be something that I would be considered long term or was just something temporary. But I was always working. I had to, I had responsibilities, so you can't stop what's meant for you. A lot of times what are people consider dead end jobs, those jobs may be getting you prepared for something greater. Right now, I've been, working a job, mainly, working at night. But for me, just thinking back on it, it's been preparing me for what I'm doing now, as far as making these videos. So I was able to do my research. A lot of times I'm just sitting in an office and I'm listening to music, and I'm sitting there and I'm writing out the lyrics. And then I'm trying to find Bible verses that go with everything. So everything happens, for a reason. If it's meant for you, it'll happen. But sometimes you got to struggle. The best part of the song for me is the last part of the song. I actually had this quote. I actually had it as a quote on my LinkedIn page, my Facebook page, my Instagram page, because I felt it resonated with me so much. Ain't no excuse for my failures. My success, no apologies. All that I own, absolute honesty. Keep it 100, but that's what they all say. I have no, if this channel ever takes off, God willing, that's going to be a success for me. If the people who are meant to see my message finally see it, that's a success for me. So there's not going to be any apologies from me for my success. I earned that. And if you earn your success, you don't owe anyone an apology for living in your success. I think a lot of people, see people who are successful and automatically assume that they think they're high and mighty. And a lot of times they don't. It's just that the inner darkness in that person who made that statement is saying that, this person thinks they're all that, but for every successful person, they've had failures. So there are no excuses for my failures. I was meant to fail. And I understand that. There were times in my life that I failed. That, I had a whole marriage that I failed in. That's the reality. I understand that. But me failing in that marriage made me understand where I went wrong. So I wanted to make sure if I ever got married again, I would not make those same mistakes. And I didn't. But what is the failure for you that you learn from? I think a lot of us take our failures and we don't see the message behind that failure. If you didn't fail, when you actually are successful, you're not going to know how to handle all of that. That just comes with life. Life is an ebb and flow, positive, negative. We're always going to have either or. So all that I owe to the world is absolute honesty. Anytime you see me on camera, anytime you see me telling my life, I'm giving you the honest truth. I don't have a reason to lie. That's one thing I'm not going to do. And you should be able to see that. You should be able to see that when I'm speaking, because when someone's kind of bending the truth. There's a way you can see that. I've seen many videos, read a few books about body language, and when someone is, somewhat telling the truth or when they're lying. There's cues to each of them. He says, I keep it 100, but that's what they all say. Growing up in the 90s, if you listen to rap, there was the era of keeping it real. For some reason, everyone seemed like they had their own definition of keeping it real. But that's what he's saying. On the West Coast, they say, now I'm keeping it 100. I'm telling you what it is. But everyone says they're keeping it 100. But are you really keeping it 100? I can truly say I'm keeping it 100. And if I'm doing anything that's not 100, I pray to God that, he changes that, in my life. But anything that I do, I'm keeping it 100. I'm being absolute honest about that. Timothy, 2 Timothy, chapter 4, verse 7. I fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. It's interesting that I found that, because if you're familiar with Nipsey, his whole thing was the marathon. The name of his clothing store was Marathon. The marathon continues. After the marathon, you win the marathon, you have your victory lap. He finished his race and he kept his faith. I wanted to say that because we all in life, we have our own races, that we go through. Each person's race is going to be different. The only way you can get through that particular race and that journey is keeping the faith. For me, I've definitely had to learn how to keep my faith, because sometimes I didn't have it. And I'm just being 100 on that. I didn't have, sometimes I lacked in my faith, but, I was able to work through that, and God, allowed me to feel that in order for me to understand that he is fighting for me, but, I fought my good fight. I finished my race. A lot of my past races, again, the marathon continues. We're still going to be racing until, we're no longer on this earth. Galatians chapter 6, verse 4 through 5. Each one should test their own actions. then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own land. This goes into people seeing what someone else has and not appreciating and acknowledging and accepting the things that they have. Everyone's journey is different. Everyone's gifts are different. That's one thing that I try to convey in my daughters. They sometimes, as kids, you see one person doing good and you're like, why are they so good at that and I'm not? My oldest daughter is very, very creative. She likes to draw, she plays her saxophone. She does things like that. But my youngest daughter is very good in sports. She is a track star. She excels in things that are physical. So for my oldest daughter, she has to work at those things. And my youngest daughter has to work at things that are being creative. So I tell them and I let them know that you two are two different people. God put certain gifts in you that he didn't put in your sister and vice versa. So you have to understand that something that may come natural, some things that may come natural to your sister, you have to work at. And some things that come natural to you, she has to work at. And for me, that's something that I've always somewhat known, that I'm good at certain things. I think I'm pretty good at communicating how I feel about certain things. I think I'm really good at expressing, myself. But I've had to get to this point, over the years in order for me to be comfortable enough to actually convey that. And just thinking back, there are times where I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. A lot of times I wasn't comfortable. A lot of times I played the back and I allowed, my friends to be in the forefront. But now, God is telling me it's my time to be up front, and I'm embracing that. I own my own flaws, celebrate your wins, by walking in your truth. So rest in peace, Nip. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, and positive energy activates constant elevation. Peace.